Good afternoon, everyone. This is James Sella. From Red Oak. We'll give everybody a few minutes a minute or two to make sure that they join in. But we're grateful to have you joining us here. We can see as we hit the top of the hour, have a lot of folks who've signed up for our AI panel today, and excited to have you join us. So we'll just give a few minutes, knowing how many back-to-backs many of our wonderful clients, friends, and customers experience. So. We'll just give another minute or so. And then when I get word from our folks in the control room that we're ready to proceed, if you can just give me a little message there, we will move forward and start our introduction for our webinar. But again, thank you very much for joining. James Sella from Red Oak here. We'll be doing introductions once we get the cue to move forward. All right. Looks like we're all ready and set to go. Good afternoon, everybody, again. Thank you again for joining us here today and for being with us. Again, my name is James Sella with Red Oak. Really excited to be the moderator for our panel here today. Wanted to start off by just giving a little bit of background information here about Red Oak. Red Oak is the only modern compliance connectivity engine where content review, distribution, and supervision work as one in an intelligent and integrated system. Marketing content is reviewed, approved, and then content flows seamlessly through for you for distribution, engagement, and analytics. And for those of you who've been following the Red Oak story over the years, Red Oak has been built by compliance experts, and we serve 17 of the top 20 global asset managers. And we're really glad today to have not only all of you joining us here on our webinar. Super grateful for our speakers today, as we're going to be talking about what everybody loves to talk about, AI. And we're going to take a look at AI from several different perspectives as we jump into our subject today. We're really honored and grateful to have a former regulator and current legal counsel joining us, and we'll have him introduce himself here in a moment. We're excited to have an enterprise practitioner who's implemented AI through the compliance lens join us, and we'll have him introduce us here in a moment. And then we have the technology and supervision perspective as well from our partners, and I like to call our sister company, MirWeb, joining us here as well today. So we're all going to let them introduce themselves. Brian, if you wouldn't mind starting us off today, could you tell us a little bit about your background and the firm that you're at?
Sure. Thanks, James, and hi, everybody. I'm in Washington, D.C., as you can tell, floating above the tidal basin. I am a partner at Eversheds Sutherland in D.C. I'm co-head of the securities enforcement practice, and I was previously with the SEC's enforcement staff and also Deputy Chief Counsel of Enforcement at NASD.
So you spent quite a few years inside NASD and the SEC before moving into advising firms on advising firms that they regulate. Can you share with us, or how does that knowledge and perspective help you prepare for exams and enforcement, especially now on something very new like AI?
Sure. So, yeah, as you said, my perspective is shaped by seeing these issues on both sides of the table. I spent more than a decade as a regulator, first at the SEC and then at NASD, now FINRA. So I learned how regulators build cases, how they develop theories of liability, what kind of evidence they find persuasive, and ultimately what drives enforcement decisions. And just as importantly, I saw what kinds of explanations and remediation efforts actually resonate with the staff, and then which ones don't. And because I've been on both sides, I can often anticipate the questions the regulators are going to ask and the concerns behind those questions, which then, in my role now, helps prepare firms more effectively and address issues before they become bigger problems. And I've had the opportunity to apply those lessons in the real world on this side of the table for the past 2 decades in private practice. I've probably handled more than a couple hundred exams programs and investigations involving the SEC, FINRA, and state regulators. I've negotiated more than 60 settlements with FINRA and dozens with the SEC and states, and I've also successfully litigated against both the SEC and FINRA. So I think that background helps me assess matters realistically from the start, identifying strengths, weaknesses, potential exposure. And the way that I think about AI is really no different. The technology is new and exciting and sometimes scary, frankly, but the regulatory questions are familiar, and we'll be talking about all of those types of things: supervision, disclosure, record keeping, customer communications, books, records, privacy, governance, cybersecurity, everything basically. The key, though, is understanding both the emerging technology and the regulatory framework that the examiners and the enforcement staff are using to evaluate it. So that combination helps firms prepare for the questions the regulators are asking right now, and also, frankly, the ones they're likely going to ask a year or two or three from now.
Especially as we expect rules to be, growing, modifying, and I shouldn't say growing, modifying, but adjusting to this new AI world that we live in, right, Brian? So excellent. Well, thank you so much. Glad to have your wealth of experience here with us. We also have Jamie Hoyle. Jamie, can you introduce yourself as well?
Sure. Yeah. Hi, I am Jamie Hoyle. I am the head of product at MirrorWeb. We are a communications supervision platform. And don't let the accent fool you. I do live in America. I'm here in very, well, usually sunny but rainy Austin, Texas, alongside James. So yeah, super excited to speak to everyone today.
Cowboy boots here, so you know.
That's a Texas accent, Jamie.
I can throw in a few howdies if people want, but yeah, no. MirrorWeb, yeah, we started out as a website archiving firm, as the name implies, but we've really built a really strong business in sort of AI native communication supervision across social media, across mobile channels, team communications, email, all the things that you've come to expect from a modern communications supervision platform.
And for those who are joining us, Red Oak and MirrorWeb share a unique partnership. We've sometimes referred to each other as sister companies. Our chairman of the board at Red Oak is also the CEO of MirrorWeb. We're also owned primarily by the same private equity firm, Mainsail. And so we work extremely closely together in this partnership. So glad to have you here with us, Jamie. You've spent a decade building in this space. You've seen a real shift and a lot of changes that have happened, not only in that decade, but just in the last 2 or 3 years. Can you talk about when it came to AI, what is that inflection point like from where you're sitting, watching thousands of clients kind of go through this sort of experience of adjusting to a new world with AI? Can you kind of talk about what that's been like from your perspective?
Yeah, for sure. And I think it's really important to go even a bit further back, where every single person that we spoke to, 15 years ago, people were using, lexicons and keywords to try and do communication supervision. And you'll hear the example, I use the phrase guarantee all the time as example. A bunch of people on this call will have guarantee inside their lexicons for communication supervision. But if I guarantee that Spain's going to win the World Cup on Sunday, that's not something that you should be concerned about as a supervisory professional. So
I believe you guaranteed English earlier in the week, if I recall.
Well, yeah, I may have done it. Yeah, that's okay. Yeah, I'm over it, right? So, and really now, as we sort of the industry then went into sort of what we call it lowercase AI, so more of the machine learning and trying to do pattern recognition. And what we found broadly across the industry is that it didn't do a great job of cutting down on the false positives that people really suffer from when they're trying to do communications review. Where we see the big unlock and the big advantage, particularly inside our client base, has been from this new generation of AI and sort of LLM-powered systems that are able to actually provide defensibility, but also crucially explainability to the regulator, being able to show chain of thought and chain of custody, being able to say, this is what we think happened, this is why it's been flagged, and this is why this requires your attention. So I think we sort of sit at this inflection point now where for the first time, sort of as compliance professionals, like we're able to take a look at this software, take a look at the technology, and meaningfully adjust the way that we're able to do communications review. Focus on the core workflow and being able to demonstrate to the regulator that you have a clean, safe, and efficient program that is really catching the things that matter. And we're able to now build these systems that don't just reduce the number of false positives, but really do a good job of highlighting things that you may not have seen previously with lexicon or these prior lowercase AI systems.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Jamie. Glad to have you here with us. And finally, our good friend Derek Stern, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself from the client and compliance side.
Yeah, sure. Hi, everybody, and thank you, James, and everyone for having me. So my name is Derek Stern. I'm the head of global distribution compliance at Manulife John Hancock, working in our wealth and asset management business. So in my role, I lead our compliance program that supports our marketing and distribution activities across the wealth and asset management business and includes products from our mutual funds to ETFs, retirement insurance, institutional products, including private markets. So our primary role is really to help ensure that materials and our communications that we use to market our products across the globe, and we're working in North America, Europe, and Asia, and we partner very closely with cross-functional business partners to help our business grow in a compliant way.
Oh, thank you, Derek. And so you've had 3 decades in your career, compliance career, meaning you started when you're about 9 or 10 years old, right?
You're too
So
kind.
that's right. So how have things changed in the last year or two? What's changed the most when it comes to your role, specifically around, the question or subject of AI?
Yeah, I think more has changed in the last year or two than probably in the previous years of my career combined. So I think, at least in my experience, historically, compliance teams, we always operated in a very fairly traditional style when we're reviewing marketing materials. Today, we're dealing with different types of content, whether it's social media, digital content, AI-created content. And I think the expectation from our business partners for speed to market has changed rapidly in the last couple of years. Our volume of information is increasing, but the times that we get to review these materials always seems to shrink. So that's certainly been a big change. Things are moving faster. We need to have, continue to evolve our governance processes to make sure we're still meeting regulatory adherence, even though we're moving quicker. So I think that's one of the biggest shifts that I've seen, is that compliance is becoming more integrated into the business. We're being asked to partner with them earlier on in the process, and try and help shape solutions and provide guidance rather than just reviewing the product, which is what we used to be doing. We get something at the end stage, look for a compliance review, and by the time something had to change, it might have been too late. But technology has had a major impact, I think, over the last even 6 months to a year. So here at Manulife John Hancock, our leadership from the top has made AI a priority for us. And it's also creating opportunities for us to rethink how compliance operates. So I think we've seen some of the most meaningful change in the recent years. And what we're trying to do is embrace it and find ways that it can help us improve, but still manage efficiencies and regulatory risk. So I think in the past, we're kind of moving away from adapting from change that happened maybe periodically to an environment where change is happening all the time right now.
Yeah, and that seat at the table that compliance has had over the years or has been fighting to get, it seems like that maybe that seat's getting bigger, or there are more seats at the table and more people coming together when it comes to these questions, I would imagine.
Yes, they now view us more as a partner than one of these roadblocks, if you will.
Yes, absolutely. All right, so thank you for the introduction. So Brian, let's kind of start off with you. So as outside counsel working with financial services firms who are navigating AI adoption, tell us kind of what that current regulatory landscape looks like right now.
Yeah, so there are no existing AI rules, and the easiest way to think about it is that the regulators are not waiting for specific AI rules before examining firms or even bringing enforcement actions. Instead, the SEC and FINRA have emphasized that existing technology neutral rules already apply. So if somebody asks, what's the AI rule? The practical answer is that the rules governing things like supervision, communications, conflicts, record keeping, fiduciary obligations are already the starting point. So first point is existing rules already apply to AI. FINRA and the SEC have consistently taken the position that firms remain responsible for their conduct, their decisions, their communications, whatever it is that's generated by AI tools. FINRA Regulatory Notice 2409 specifically observed that generative AI affects virtually every core compliance function, including supervision, communications, and record keeping. So just as some examples, Reg BI and fiduciary duty obligations would require firms to exercise independent judgment rather than relying solely on a model's output. Supervision requirements, 3110 and 20647 require controls tailored to how AI tools actually operate, including testing, validation, and appropriate human oversight. The communications rules, 2210 under FINRA, and the SEC's marketing rule apply to AI-generated content just as they would apply to traditional communications. And then books and records, and we'll talk about that in more detail in a bit, 17A3 and 4, and then 2042 under the Advisors Act apply to certain AI-related records, inputs, outputs, supervisory documentation. And then as a side note, the SEC's 2023 predictive data analytics proposal, which wasn't adopted, remains important because it reflects continued regulatory concern about conflicts, optimization algorithms, and AI-driven investor interactions. The second point I want to make is that enforcement is already happening, and it's sort of back to basics. The SEC has brought a few enforcement actions involving AI washing, charging firms for overstating AI capabilities. And then not directly in the AI space, but FINRA brought an AML case involving a flawed automated identity verification algorithm, which really underscores a broader point that reliance on automated technology not reasonably designed for a firm's business model or its risks creates liabilities. So the regulators are not waiting for AI-specific rules to act. And then third, there's broader regulatory expectations beyond the securities laws and beyond my knowledge. FTC, CFPB, CFTC, and some states have some regulatory interest and have made statements and have some specific rules on some of the things that we're talking about. And then regarding FINRA specifically, where it's been the most active, FINRA has been translating its regulatory principles into operational expectations, I would call it. The 2026 Annual Regulatory Oversight Report elevates Gen AI to a standalone focus area. So exams are focusing on how AI is actually being used, not just what the WSPs say. So they're asking practical questions like who approved the tool, what data does it use, how are outputs validated, what the WSPs are saying in terms of reflecting real world usage. So I think there's sort of four themes here. One is governance and accountability structures that are looking at that. Second, vendor oversight, including access controls and incident management. Third, supervision of AI-generated communications and outputs. And then fourth, emerging risks from autonomous agents, and making sure humans are in the loop. So the bottom line is really this is more sort of a show your work environment, and that means documenting governance, real supervision, human accountability, and the records that let you explain to the regulators what was going on after the fact. And I think firms that can clearly tell their story will be in the strongest position when it comes to exams and enforcement investigations.
That's excellent, Brian. In fact, one of the questions that I had thought in my mind is as you were answering the question is these examiners asking about AI right throughout the entire process, I'm sure, asking, at each point of the examination where AI is being utilized, who's utilizing it, how is it being utilized. And without all that documentation and governance, I'm sure that is a very difficult question to ask if it's just Joe Schmo who's running ChatGPT on a few things here and there.
Yeah, and I used AI to read your mind, so that's why I was able to anticipate that question. So
I
we're to
appreciate that. I appreciate that. Thank you. Hey, Derek. So your firm has made AI adoption a real top priority enterprise-wide, and it's really been driven down by the CEO of your organization. So what has it been like to have that directive handed to you from your leadership, and how's that really changed how your compliance team not only sees its role in the organization, but how's it changed your role over the past 12 to 18 months?
Yeah, I think having that buy-in from the top, if you will, literally from our CEO down, has made a big difference for us. All of our leadership has been very clear that AI and other technology platforms is the strategic priority for our firm. And it's something that we all need to embrace, whether we're doing it on our own or doing it as part of a project. It all is helping us work smarter and a little bit more efficiently. So that commitment from the top creates that confidence and that culture for innovation. And we're seeing that happen throughout the organization. I think we've been pursuing pretty aggressively different AI partnerships and capabilities. We're using AI almost every day, whether it's to research issues, summarize information, identify potential risks, or even automate some routine tasks. We're starting to build our own AI agents to help us improve our workflows and our efficiencies, and also helping to support businesses and the compliance processes. So if leadership is making AI a priority, it's changing the conversation. It's not any longer is compliance being asked whether we can use AI. It's we should be, and then how do we do it responsibly, safely, and effectively? So for my team, I think what's changed a lot is that it shifted our mindset. I mentioned earlier that we've often been brought in towards the end of our process to review activities. Now we're partnering much earlier with our business partners. We're working alongside our technology teams, our legal teams, marketing teams, operational teams, really to help build new technology and tools. And we're giving them guidance on new governance, training them how to use AI, where human insight comes in. And we're doing that from the start. So we're not being reactive to something that maybe in the past we've done. So, I mentioned earlier that we're trying to position ourselves as not the Department of No or sales prevention. We're partnering with the business now because we have this buy-in from the top and really trying to find ways to use AI responsibly. So we're ensuring we have the right controls that go into AI-related tools. We're also looking into areas around privacy and record keeping, Brian, some things that you mentioned before, and ensuring that we have transparency, we understand risks involved with certain models, and I think most importantly, we still maintain that human oversight. So James, you asked about the biggest change for the team. So I think it's the opportunity for us to become a little bit more strategic. So instead of spending all of our times doing manual reviews and activities, we're focusing on technology and how that can help us spend more time on higher risk issues and give the business better guidance and build a better compliance program as we go into the future. So it's different, than we've been in the past. But I think it's one of the most significant shifts that we've seen over the last couple of years.
Would you say that there's shared responsibility within IT and compliance and marketing in maintaining those AI processes, or are those sitting with specific individual contributors within teams? Can you talk a little bit about like how structurally some of those things work?
I think if you asked me this even a month ago, I would have a very different answer. That's how fast this is changing.
Right.
I think over the last couple of weeks, several of us in the compliance organization have sat in meetings with our technology people as we're looking to build new AI type of tools. And they're coming to us and say, we need your help. What should we be doing? What should we consider? And that hasn't happened before. So yeah, we are sitting at the table from the start. I can't remember a time when compliance has been brought in to so many meetings, asked us technical questions that sometimes we can and can't answer. But it's been a great partnership, and I think that'll just get us to an area where we'll have more compliant technology going forward. That's going to help us all, stay out of trouble from the regulators and having to call Brian, but do the right thing.
I
James, if
apologize.
I could sort of supplement that, the tone at the top is critical, and the regulators always talk about it from a compliance and legal perspective. It's critical, and it's great hearing the things that Derek is talking about, that the top of his company want AI, but also want compliance involved with it. That's very important.
It is. It is. And no, it allows, at least from a regulatory point of view, folks like Derek and yourself to like educate everybody kind of along the entire process of here's what regulators are going to be asking for, and we can't be operating in a bubble, I would assume, right? So,
Yep.
so Jamie, let's turn over some time to you. So, when a lot of people hear about AI for compliance, sometimes they think about AI from a pre-approval point of view, running content through AI to try and spot check or find some things prior to it being formally submitted for review. Can you talk about maybe on the post-review side of things when it comes to like supervision, especially on the e-coms side of the business?
Yeah, for sure. And I think really the two lenses to frame this through are through really the differences in the volume of the number of items that need to be reviewed, and really the differing shapes of these content items. So if you are doing pre-review of content, of PDFs, of presentations, of marketing materials, it varies from firm to firm, but often you've got hundreds to thousands to maybe tens of thousands of submissions inside your firm in any given month. I think if you look at any reasonable sized firm, inside our system, we are seeing tens to hundreds of thousands to millions of messages a day per organization. So that really changes the way that we actually have to go away and try and supervise those capabilities. We already have sampling as an industry to try and select content that should be reviewed. And it's really our view that, we should be letting people review content that is materially more relevant to them. You shouldn't be doing a 1% sample of every single thing inside the organization. You should be looking at the 0.5% or the 1% of things that really do matter the most, that may cause material risk to your organization. And I think the other thing here is really around the shape of the kinds of content that comes through communication supervision, but also the context of what has been said previously. So when we submit a document through pre-review from PDF, PDF that it contains, it's usually self-encapsulated. It may be a clone of a different submission. It may have a history of changes, of facts, of figures that have changed. When we look at an iMessage, what we need to take into account isn't just the contents of that message. It's also the attachments of that are on that message. It's also the thread and the history. So if I say to you, James, that, that sounds great, let's go away and do that, that might not be a problem from a supervisor perspective. But if we look 3 or 4 messages back and you've said, I've got this great insight.
What is that?
Yeah, exactly. Right. Like, I've got this great inside tip. You need to jump on this right now. Suddenly that message that was previously innocuous gets an awful lot harder. So when we're thinking about AI, in communication supervision specifically, we've got to have systems that are built for the scale of dealing with millions of messages a day. You've got to have systems that are built for the context and the different shapes of that data. And it's really around making sure that we're able to give compliance officers time back to do more of that stuff. And we don't want to do these 1% samples. What we want to do is put people in a position where they are looking at the most materially risky things to their organization. And I think, Derek, you spoke a lot about, the increased value and positioning of compliance having a seat at the table in these conversations. I think, part of where the unlock for AI for supervision is let's have more time to go and do more of those activities that drive the business forward, but also B, in the sheer value unlock of the data. If it's your data and you own it and you're able to do more interesting things from a supervisory perspective, what can we now do with your systems architecture such that you can give those insights back to the business? So I do think this is a really incredibly exciting time for AI in compliance generally, but just specifically for communication supervision. We're really starting scratching the surface of what becomes possible.
Absolutely. Thank you. So Derek, you've had a chance to evaluate AI tools for your compliance department and needs. Can you tell us what that process is like? What's it like testing that sort of under the hood, and what do platforms kind of need to prove to you, I guess, and prove to your organization before you would maybe onboard them and consider them things that not only your direct reports can use and your teams can use, but also perhaps things that are touching the field that you're monitoring as well.
Yeah, and James, I'll first say that the way I look at things is different than the rest of the firm. So we have a whole model risk committee that's involved with reviewing AI tools. So I'm not going to speak to that. I'm going to focus on what my team and I would be looking for. And to be quite honest, we're not looking for a perfect solution. So we want something that's going to give us some predictability, transparency, and the right controls that we need for our business. So we're looking at a couple things. We want to understand first and foremost how the tool would evaluate data and how it will handle our data. How's it being collected? Where is it being stored? Who has access to it? I think those are some questions we all have to look at right from the start. More importantly, I think something that Brian was saying before, we need to look at explainability. So if we're using AI to reach a conclusion or to give us an example or give us a recommendation, we need to understand how that tool got to that answer and be able to document that. So, being in our regulated environment, it's not just enough for the tool to give us an answer and say we got this from AI. We need to feel confident that we can explain and defend the process that went on behind the scenes to get to that answer. We also look at governance and oversight. We want to know what the tool is going to do around model updates, testing, monitoring, and what's change management. I think everything that we're looking at today is changing so fast that what a tool can do today, it may perform differently 6 months down the road. So we want to make sure a tool can adapt to that. And then lastly, we want to figure out how the tool fits in with our human review process. James, you mentioned the tone from the top. The tone from the top has been that AI isn't meant to replace people, it's meant to augment what we're doing. So we're looking at tools that are an enhancement, not a replacement for human judgment. So I think some of the most successful implementations that we would work with are often the ones that help people work more efficiently while still keeping human accountability. And I think one thing I should probably add on is we need to test this out. So a vendor can promise us the world and say our tool can do X, Y, and Z, but until we sit down, test it out, and see how it performs, we're not going to be comfortable to make sure it's fitting in with our own risk set scenarios. So at the end of the day, before we place an AI tool into a compliance workflow or adopt it, we need to be confident that the tool is going to be reliable. It understands what our risk metrics are and know what the controls are in our regulated environment. If we can do all of that, then we're in good shape to move forward with, implementing tools.
Awesome. So, Brian and Jamie, can we like jump in a little bit or double click? It was something like to say into a couple of things that Derek said. So, one of them is talking about all of the sort of related data associated with running content through AI. So we're talking about probably prompts, we're talking about responses and requests, we're talking about some potentially decently technical sorts of things. Brian, maybe first with you, maybe follow up with Jamie a little bit more on the technical side, but can you talk about like how firms should maybe be thinking about and handling basically all that sort of AI metadata and data associated with just running things through a model?
It's a great question. It's a tough issue. As we said, there aren't specific AI rules and there aren't specific AI retention periods. So the goal is having a framework that you can explain and defend. And here's a way to think about it, and not legal advice, as Matt Levine says. So you first want to determine whether you have a record that has to be retained. So what's the data? You have to figure out what the data is before you decide how long to keep it. AI tools, as you said, generate prompts, intermediate outputs, decision logs, operational data, all kinds of stuff. And not all of that has the same regulatory significance. So the threshold is whether the information constitutes a required record. Clearly, once it's sent to a client or used in a recommendation or cited in marketing, then we're talking about a different story. And FINRA has made clear, again, in 2409, but also there was, I think, 2507 and then the 2026 annual report, that existing record-keeping rules apply regardless of whether AI generates it. The second thing to think about is off-channel risk. Just like off-channel communications, if employees are using unapproved AI platforms for client-related work, generating records outside the firm, that's an issue. Third, once you have identified a required record, then you have to apply existing retention periods. So for broker dealers, communications, 3 years under 17A4B4, while other books and records, they have 6-year requirement. RIAs generally for their books and records have the 5-year requirement under 2042. So the bottom line is that existing record keeping requirements apply regardless of whether the content is created by me or somebody else at a firm or by an AI tool. And the FINRA 2026 report emphasized that point. So as a practical matter, some firms end up applying the full regulatory retention periods to AI-related records that support things like client communications, recommendations, disclosures, supervisory review, or other regulated activities, but they have shorter periods for lower risk operational or system preference data. So for agentic AI systems, FINRA has emphasized audibility, transparency, and governance considerations, suggesting that firms may want to maintain sufficient records to reconstruct significant actions, decision pathways, key inputs, things like that, to explain or to supervise an outcome. The fourth issue, and Derek touched on this, I think, is vendors, right? So much of this data lives with third-party AI providers, and in other contexts, firms have been cited for failing to verify vendors' record-keeping capabilities and for contracts that don't address retention obligations. So the lessons that we've learned on the cybersecurity front apply here. And then the last thing I want to emphasize is you have to build it for explainability and if there's litigation or regulatory issues. So the goal isn't retaining everything forever. It's retaining what's regulatorily required and then enough to reconstruct and defend the process. And then separately, if there's litigation or regulatory inquiries, there's going to be holds. So the system has to be designed to override any scheduled deletions. So the framework has to take that stuff into account from the start. So those are sort of the basic principles that I think about.
And
So
Brian,
isn't
there a risk maybe of keeping too much information that might be subject to a regulatory exam?
Yeah, that's always an issue. And a lot of firms think they have an automatic deletion or retention policy, but it turns out they're keeping everything forever. Same thing with AI. You don't want to keep what you don't need to keep, but on the other hand, you do have to balance it because you do want to be able to tell the story.
And Jamie, could you jump in and talk about just what that kind of looks like from not only a volume of data that it's almost like a brand new volume of data that we're now ingesting and archiving and storing, but also can you talk about like what that means from a UI point of view or a usability point of view when it comes to that sort of transparency that Brian was talking about?
100%. And I think there's two ways to break that down, right? There is the increase in generated communication, so things like from a Claude, from a Copilot, from a ChatGPT enterprise. Firms have different views on this. I think we are seeing increasingly across our customer base that people are choosing to err on the side of caution and retain those communications because they may contain client relevant information or business relevant information or the decisioning process required to reach to tell the full story around a given communication. Because eventually it gets used in an email, it gets used in social media. They want to be able to tell the journey end to end. I think from an actual sort of decisioning perspective, so why we say a given email is potentially a risk and should be reviewed, or how we select a social media post to appear in a compliance review queue. You've got to have compliance grade AI. You've got to be in a position where we have explainability and we're able to say exactly, this is the version of the prompts that caused this to happen. This is the reason why we thought this was a thing. These are specific keywords and flags and messages, and this is what happens as a result. Like, because ultimately, I think as Derek and Brian have spent a lot of time talking about today, like the human is still responsible for the output of that system. You'll hear people talk about putting compliance in autopilot, and you should run for the hills. Like, you cannot be in a position where you are entrusting the system to just do things and figure it out, and then if something goes wrong, it's still the responsibility of the organization. It's still the responsibility of the person. So vendors and AI vendors should be very, very transparent around exactly what they're doing and why they're doing it. And that should be available inside the UIs of these systems. I think it's so important. It's a fundamental principle of what we've done.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. So, Jamie, kind of back to you on a maybe different topic. So, for many years across, not only from the supervising e-communications and also from an ad review point of view and other sorts of compliance review processes, lexicons and keywords have been a key part of how firms have tried to identify things that need their attention. Random sampling is also kind of in that mix. And someone who's been in the space for I used to have hair like Jamie back in the day. I mean, maybe not too long, but been in space for, coming up on 20 years or so. We've been waiting for AI to help us replace these things that we knew were problematic, that we knew that, the word guarantee is hard to use to trigger based on a variety of uses of contexts and manners. So with the sort of what I would kind of call the legacy or the old way of doing things from a lexicon point of view, can you talk about that has often generated a lot of false positives, and can you talk about how AI is helping to kind of turn the tide and really allow customers and clients to be able to really spot where the issues are?
Yeah, and I think as well, it's worth first starting on how AI is going to make this worse. So, if we're not careful around the choice of vendors that you've got, there's like an obvious way and then a non-obvious way around how AI can lead to an increase in false positives. So the obvious way is if a vendor implements AI as an afterthought. So if you have the same lexicons, you have the same review processes, the same review queues, and they add a little button in saying review with AI, you end up with the worst of both worlds, right? Because that takes 20, 30 seconds to go away and generate an output. And you've not actually reduced any of the noise whatsoever. So it's an AI workflow, right? But it actually takes longer to clear those alerts and clear those queues. The non-obvious way is actually what we are seeing generally is an increase in the individual number of communications per rep and per employee. Because now, you can go in, you can use Claude, you can send more emails, you can go away and generate more content as an end user. And the net impact that then has is that your review queues get busier and busier. There's more and more content. If you're using lexicon, using random sampling, either way, more input in leads to more messages to review. So I think what we are going to see over the next certainly we're seeing it now, but particularly over the next 18 months, is that each individual inside an organization will generate more and more client communications over a bunch of different formats and different platforms, which leads to more work for these communication supervisory teams because there's much more data being generated per person as a result of AI. So how do we cut through that noise? How do we be in a position where we're able to actually turn that from a potential issue for supervisory teams into something that is a force multiplier? And I think you've got to design the systems around the human in the loop. You've got to make sure that there is still human aware and accountable for the reasoning and judgment. But you've got to make sure that we're actually taking a new approach to the way that these review queues are built. So the way that we have handled this is really through starting with written supervisory policies and with training manuals. So people upload their WSPs to our platform. We automatically then go away and generate tailored supervisory prompts and systems based on their actual compliance handbook. So if we have something like $250 annual gift limit, for example, what we're able to do is then really harness the power of the LLM and the AI systems, be able to go and say, hey, okay, well, you went with a client to the French Laundry. The LLM knows that the French Laundry is a 3 Michelin star restaurant in Napa Valley. We're able to start flagging content like that based on context, not on the keywords. So if you have the right UI and the right layout, and you're able to apply that logical reasoning, whilst making sure that all of this is explainable, it's very, very clear what is happening and why, that's how we end up with a reduction in the number of overall alerts. And the things that you're actually looking at are suddenly an awful lot more relevant, because we're not just doing keywords or random sampling. We're able to very precisely say, this is why we're reviewing this, and this is why we think this matters.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So Brian, a couple of questions for you. So we're kind of an interesting period of time right now where, our clients, firms, clients that you're working with are making a lot of decisions about AI with limited regulatory guidance that's specific about it. I mean, you went through it, but earlier on, as far as like returning to basics, which is absolutely the right way to go about it. But is there a precedent in your experience where something new has come out like this before and there wasn't a lot of guidance along the way? And like, does this remind you of anything that you've seen, kind of in your experience in the past when it comes to, kind of an expansion of capabilities that technology has provided?
Yeah, so electronic communications, right? So the books and records rules were written when people used paper, and I think three of us here remember all that stuff before emails. But
Three of us
then
do.
three of us,
Correct.
yeah. But then people started emailing. So then there were a number of regulatory actions 20 years ago on email retention. And then more recently, we saw the SEC bring all of the off-channel cases dealing with texting, WhatsApp, that sort of thing. No changes in the rules or regulations. The regulators said, these are the rules and this is how we're applying it. The more recent commission has sort of been rethinking that, and I think we will be seeing changes in the books and records rules. But that's a perfect example of new technology, old rules, and if regulators see an issue or a concern about it, they're going to apply the existing rules to the new situation.
So let's kind of maybe dive into that a little bit deeper, just from a scenario point of view. So let's say a firm runs AI as part of its review processes, and it keeps final decisions on the record. But once the retention window lapses and the underlying AI generated data gets deleted, then there's like a 2 or 3 year sort of gap in between that period of time when a regulator comes in, starts poking around, and looks for them to explain their decisions. If a firm can't if those AI records are gone, uh, I guess from where you sit, how should firms be preparing for such scenarios? And it sounds like some of those scenarios might already be occurring, but the future may be. Do you envision more of that in the future potentially?
Yeah, so it's an explainability issue rather than a pure retention issue. And again, not legal advice. Everything's based on facts and circumstances. But in general, firms need to explain how a decision was reached and not just the final outcome. Nobody's expecting any firm to preserve every prompt forever, but they do need to show how a decision was reached, what role AI played, what role human oversight played. So you do need that. And if you don't have that, that's a supervision gap, really. So you have to build a documented decision trail for higher risk AI use cases. So if you're talking about, recommendations or communications, you want the key things to be within that you are retaining. And one thing which people may not even think about is model versioning. That can be important if a model has been updated or retired. I was involved with one case, not AI, but CRM related, and the CRM tool had changed, and that became very relevant for the regulators. So you have to focus on that. And as I mentioned before, the FINRA 2026 report highlighted auditability, transparency, and supervisory concerns. So firms should really be thinking about that. And then third, you have to recognize that that's where the regulators are looking. They're looking at the monitoring of prompts and outputs. And then the last advice that I would give and that some firms are doing is you should be testing now. As you mentioned, a regulator may come in a year, 2 years, 3 years from now. It probably makes sense for firms to look at decisions they made 6 months ago or a year ago and see whether they could reconstruct it. And if you have problems reconstructing it now, you should probably be looking at what you're doing for the future exams that come about.
Awesome, awesome. Thanks so much, Brian. So, Derek, a question for you. You said it to me before personally. As we've talked about this subject quite a bit over the last several months. But you've mentioned that in your own view on AI that things could look differently even 6 months from now, maybe even a month from now. You kind of alluded to earlier on because the technology is changing and improving, moving very quickly. So, what's one thing you're watching really closely? Either a development or a decision that you think will most change how your team uses AI between now and then?
Yeah, and let me just start off by something that I experienced just a few hours ago, and Brian, it just relates to what you said is we're going through a wireframe, uh, you know, PowerPoint presentation on how an AI tool that we're working on right now could work. And someone did this very basic, it was an AI generated outline of different steps. And one of our heads of marketing said, that's great, but it's not good enough to have on paper. You got to document this and we got to keep it. So the fact that marketing people are saying this, like to me, that was like, that's brand new. So, that's a good first step. But I think for me these days, the biggest thing that we're really looking at is how are agents going to help us? How's AI going to help us be more efficient and maybe automate some of our workflows today? So, we all know that AI is generating content for us, it's summarizing content, and it's been really valuable, but we're looking to help it, change how we're doing our work. And there's enormous potential for us in the compliance team. So we're not just dealing with policies and regulations and disclosures anymore. We're using AI to become a little bit more capable in navigating some of the complexities that we've experienced that comes along with new products and new tools. But we're making sure that we have the right governance process and practices in place that are going alongside this new technology. So for our teams, the capabilities are advancing really quickly. Our organization seems to be advancing just as quickly, which is a good thing. But, being at the table with our marketing people that says we need to make sure we're doing the right thing is great. It makes our jobs easier and ensures that the governance that we have in place hopefully works. I know it's a work in progress, but it's a good start. So what we're trying to do is balance everything, take advantage of the innovation, but manage that accountability, ensure that we can provide that regulatory defensibility, if you will, and we can prove what we're doing and document all that stuff. But James, if you ask me this, I know we talk about 6 months before, 6 months later. I think our answer is going to be different. We want to make sure that the tools we're using today, and I touched about this earlier, are still going to work 6 months from now. I know things are going to change. Maybe we'll get some rule guidance. But I think the organizations that are going to succeed, and hopefully we're working towards that, are ones that combine a lot of these capabilities that we've talked about here with strong governance, oversight, and hopefully well-trained employees that know how to do this, and having compliance have a seat at the table. And I think all of that could lead to some successful outcomes.
Excellent, excellent. So, Jamie, let's tie on to that a little bit. We've talked a lot about how AI is we're no longer having the conversations about is AI here to stay or not. I mean, I think we've kind of all sort of moved on from that. That seems so, I don't know, like 1995 in reference to how long ago, or that seems like we've kind of all accepted that. However,
Sounds like 2024, I think, actually.
2024, yes.
Yeah.
No, I know what you're saying, but that feels like a decade or two ago that we were having those sorts of conversations. I think it's here, and it's not only here to stay, but it's here to stay and evolve quite a bit. So, kind of on that vein, Jamie, we talked about compliance and supervision when it comes to AI. Can you talk about like what are some other things that you see AI playing a role in, especially for our compliance and supervision friends, if you will, that are on the line that aren't necessarily about supervision and compliance that maybe AI allows us to unlock a little bit?
Yeah, and I think really one of the really interesting unlocks that we start to get from all of this is what else can we do?
Yeah.
Because the historic challenge that firms have had is that all of this data gets siloed inside a platform. And, we talked about it today. Compliance hasn't necessarily always had a seat at the table. You've had this piece of compliance software that has been built for a purpose that, it sits and it goes away, it does that job. I think one of the things that has been really transformational in concept, both to this industry and to the world generally, has been the way that people are starting to use connectors between all of these different systems. So now you can go into Claude, you can write a prompt, and if you've got Salesforce set up via MCP server and you've got your Outlook set up via an MCP server, you can suddenly start to do these cross-platform workflows that are very, very, important. Now, there is regulatory and there is a compliance and data security challenge here, right? You need to make sure that all of this is accountable, that we have this explainability through the system. You know exactly who and what is where, what is being used. And so where I think we'll see over the next 6 to 12 months, and maybe to Derek's point, like we are moving so quickly to get some of these things into place that like what I say today will change completely in 6 months as we have more and more emerging technology. But I think this idea of compliance connectivity, where we're able to start bridging these gaps between these platforms and really allow this end-to-end workflow of content gets reviewed and then it gets, you can track that all the way through all these disparate systems, see the engagement and how and why it's been used. Like, I just think there is so much opportunity ahead of us. And now that requires you to use vendors who want to be open, who want to be in a position where they can enable these kind of behaviors. And it requires you to really evaluate every single part of your stack and your people. So do we have the right software to be able to go away and have that openness and that interconnectivity to unlock these new workflows and business experiences? And do we have well-trained staff who know how they can use these systems and start thinking about the interlinks? So I just think this is an incredibly exciting time for the industry generally. I think there is an awful lot of value that we can start to unlock, particularly as firms start to work close together. So yeah, we're super, super excited about the journey ahead.
Absolutely. Thank you. Well, we're coming to a close on our time. Just wanted to, first of all, not only thank our panelists, but maybe give each of you a final word, final sort of 30 seconds or so of something that maybe a little golden nugget or a little whatever that you'd like to share, with folks that maybe we didn't get to cover, or something that's maybe on your mind. Maybe you want to get a little crazy, make some predictions about what you see coming in the next 6 to 12 to 18 months on this. It's being recorded, so we will maybe hold you to it. But let's start with Derek, if you're cool with that. Maybe what's sort of final word on the subject that we've had here at today.
Yeah, I'm cool with that, but I'm not going to make any predictions. We're in compliance.
I
We
knew
don't
you
predict
wanted.
anything, right? So
I knew you wanted.
no, no, but thank you again for having us. I think from my standpoint, everything that I've said before, having the tone from the top has really given compliance a voice. We have a seat at the table that we're being brought in earlier. I think all of that is important if you're going to be using AI and technology, using the right platforms, understanding how it works, having the right governance. And again, I can't repeat this enough, but ensuring the human in the loop stays front and center, to me is one of the most important things. So those are the things that I've seen that really have changed over the last couple months. I don't expect it to. I think it should get better in the future. And if we can do all that, then I think firms will start to be able to leverage these tools a little bit more successfully and create that efficiency that AI is supposed to help us out with.
Thank you, Derek. And thank you for being here with us. Brian, final word from you?
Also, I don't make predictions. Firms are adapting to this new technology, and you have to realize that the regulators are as well. So they're thinking through the same sorts of issues that everyone on this webinar is thinking through. So I would suggest reading the regulatory guidance, reading speeches that come out, and looking at exam findings to the extent they're out there, or enforcement actions. I think initially the regulators will bring cases dealing with low-hanging fruit, firms not having adequate policies and procedures, not keeping anything relevant, that sort of thing. At some point, they may push the envelope. We're in sort of a regulator light environment now, so there may not be a lot of pushing the envelope, but it is important that firms do listen to what the regulators are saying and try to read the tea leaves as much as you can.
Thank you very much. So, Jamie, it's on you if you got predictions. If not, we won't hold you to it, but
I think I'll stay with the panel. I think there is so much moving so fast that, I could make a prediction now, and I think in 6 months' time that we'll be even further ahead of what I say. So, and I think, really, I think as Brian said, it's the same regulations, it's the same standards. You've got to have humans in the loop. But I think if you've got that explainability, that compliance grade AI as the baseline for what is possible, then there's a whole world of opportunity that is being opened up now. And I think as I look towards our roadmap for the rest of the year, as I look towards the art of the possible with all of this stuff, where we can start to bring these systems closer together and get better and better and better at the supervisory and the agentic workflows here, like there is just so much opportunity. So if there's one thing that you want to take away from this panel and this session, there is so much opportunity inside your organizations, inside your functions, from the vendors that you choose to use. Like it's a new world, and there's some amazing things that we're going to do together over the next few months. So super exciting.
Thank you, Jamie. So again, thank you, Derek, Brian, and Jamie. Thank you so much for lending your expertise and your voice and your time. And thank you for everybody who's joined our webinar today. Again, my name is James Sella from Red Oak. We will also be sending out a recording in the coming days and wish everybody a wonderful day and take care. Thank you so much for joining us. And again, Brian, Jamie, and Derek, thank you again. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks.